Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harenkiu, and today is episode number 23, What My Goals Are as a Healer. Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. We are having a conversation about what my goal is as your healer. So, when somebody comes to see me, my goal is rarely to fix them or to fix something that is wrong. When I say rarely, I mean never. There is nothing to fix. And that perspective is a super important one to have in my work because we can tend to get really in our head and logical about things if we're focused on a specific thing that we are trying to change because we're making the assumption that the healing process is linear. That's not to say it's not good to have like issues that you want to work on or intentions. It's just that my goal is not specifically that. So, if you come to me because you're having depression, obviously depression will be resolved through working together. I have yet to have someone where it isn't, but that's not specifically my goal. My goal is to make you whole. So, the whole point of healing is wholeness. It's not perfection, it's not fixing something that's wrong. It's picking up all the pieces of us that are not or no longer inside of our being. So, a little shift of perspective here. Um, One of the things that I do, which I find to be really unique to my work, is that I can see or feel, sense, I don't know what you want to say, how much percentage of a person is present in their body. So if I lay my hands on someone, most people, I get a reading almost immediately. You're only 10% here, you're 60% here, you're 80% here. It is extremely rare, not impossible, but extremely rare for me to touch someone and say like, "Oh, you're 100% here." I don't know that we're ever 100% here, but there's 100% of how much of you needs to be here in order to be present and accounted for on earth. Um, and my goal is to get you up to 100%. So I see like why people are not here. Maybe it's only in certain parts of their bodies, maybe it's something happening in the energy field, or something else entirely. But that's like one of the most basic reads that I do on all my clients where I get to see how much of them is here. That's also an indicator of wholeness. So when I say wholeness, I mean wholly here as a human, as you were intended to be. Because somewhere else you are completely whole, but I'm talking about specifically on the earth plane in the 3D reality. So, one of the things that I think doesn't happen enough in healing spaces is that people don't do shadow work. They get stuck in the expansion only and they bypass the thing that helps them stay grounded and embodied in their expansion. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the shadow work versus the expansion today. So we do need to go into shadow work and expansion equally on the healing journey. You cannot just be doing healing around like Reiki and astral work and past life regression and all of those things that are very outside of the body. Um, you have to also be going in. You have to also be going deep. So, doing shadow work means digging up trauma, processing that trauma, undoing the things that we learned, exploring our inner demons. This is the heavier, not fun work. There's a lot of practitioners that believe you don't have to do this kind of work, which is kind of funny. Those people are typically not in their bodies at all, which may or may not be their path in life. But I find for me specifically, my clients, and for shamanic work, you do have to be embodied. You do have to be here fully. And in order to do that, you need to do the shadow work. Like you can't skip it. And then on the other side of that, expansion. So there's like an equal 50-50 of shadow and expansion. And expansion means widening our view of the world. It means opening doorways. It means extending the boundaries of our existence and what we think is possible. It's going outward, whereas shadow work is going inward. And these things need to be addressed in tandem. It's not like one or the other. So the healing cycle I've noticed tends to be excavate, excavating like the heaviness inside of us, the things that need to be remembered, the things that need to be addressed, processing them, releasing them, and then expanding. So you have to open up space inside yourself in order to expand, in order to bring new energies and concepts in. So you have to do that excavation. And sometimes excavation can be like, we're just going to take this out and toss it, but that's super, super rare. And that's one of the things I notice with some practitioners is that they do things like, what's the word? Extraction, but they're just like tossing it out into the universe. And a lot of times we need to process that stuff. Like it's there for a reason, not every time, but definitely sometimes. And I think that gets bypassed a lot. And so we excavate, and then if it's unprocessed, there's no like gems or gold of learning that has happened. And so it just becomes a hole that gets filled right back up. And then releasing it is part of that process to excavate, to process the thing, and then release it. And then we get to go to the next level. Then we get to expand. And this cycle never ends in the healing journey. It never ends. I'm pretty sure until the day you die. I'm almost 40. I haven't found the ending. Um, and you must have each of these pieces, or we're creating more work for us in the future. It might not be this lifetime, it might be the next lifetime. But if you skip any of these steps, you are bypassing the work. So I'm also not saying that you should be doing shadow work forever. I think a lot of people get stuck in that space because it's comfortable. It's warm and slimy and gross, and we're comfortable there. But a lot of people get stuck in doing the shadow work forever. It needs to be 50-50 of each. And if we're not doing that like deeper healing work, we're not in our body, we are creating karma. We are creating it for ourselves. A lot of times we're creating it for our family. And that will come back around either in this lifetime or your next lifetime. Why not do it right the first time? So my job is actually kind of like a spiritual doctor. I wish I could call myself a spiritual doctor and have people Google that and like know what it means. Because I go in and I diagnose. I will look at somebody, I will talk to them, and immediately it becomes clear of like what needs to be done and the steps that it needs to be done. I don't know if that's a shaman thing or if that's a Nadia thing, but that's what I do. So I'll identify, do we need to excavate first or do we need to expand first? So we don't automatically assume, like, oh, yeah, you have depression. We're going to go back and dig up your childhood trauma. Actually, you might not need that yet. You might need to be exposed to the concept of past life regression because you don't have a strong sense of like where we're from and why we're here. Maybe you don't have a strong sense of what happens after we die. And I can see super clearly this puzzle piece needs to be slid in first, or else your 3-year-old is not going to want to come back to your body because she has a magical way of thinking and you don't, and she doesn't match here with you yet. So it's really important to do these things in order or else they don't stick. So if I make the assumption that we need to go excavate childhood trauma around your 3-year-old first, I could actually re-traumatize her and then it'll be even harder to get her back. So doing that initial read of do we excavate or do we expand is really important and really valuable to my work. Then we talk about like, okay, do we start on the physical, the emotional, or the spiritual level? So sometimes the body needs assistance first, and it means you need to go see a massage therapist or do some acupuncture or some yoga, and that has to happen before anything else happens. Sometimes you need emotional. assistance first. Maybe what I'm seeing is a ton of emotions locked away in your stomach, and it's literally like a fortress. So we actually won't get anywhere else until we tackle those emotions first and we start releasing them. And then we can start looking at the other aspects of healing that need to take place. Or sometimes it's the spiritual. Specifically in the demographic that I work with, people who are looking for a shaman, there's a lot of spiritual connection, and we require a lot more assistance from the spirit side than other people because it's like part of who we are, it's part of our way of being in existing in the world. And so making connections spiritually might be the first thing that needs to happen. So just like with the excavation or the expansion, when it comes to what aspect do we come at first, the physical, emotional, or spiritual, that's really important too. So if I try to force some spiritual stuff on you before you have these heavy emotions processed, you're going to block the spiritual connection and then you're going to think that it's bullshit and you're not going to revisit it. So it's really important that we tackle the aspect that wants to come first, that's ready to break first. It's kind of like a giant Rubik's Cube. The way that the universe works, things have to be in a certain sequence in order to unlock. And I feel like I have this gift of seeing the Rubik's Cube of a person's body, of a person's like development and healing process, and can identify like which way we need to go first. Um, Sometimes I even need to have the conversation of like, do you need a therapist or do you need a shaman first? Is there stuff that you need to get out and unpack before I can even help you? Or can I help you with that stuff? And then I'm going to send you to a therapist after we have one or two sessions together. Um, and so usually when I see someone, I'll give them like a list of things that need to be done, from homework assignments to books to read to practices they need to incorporate. And sometimes it's really simple. And the spirits are like, yeah, they just need to go to yoga once a week. That's it. And it sounds kind of ridiculous because some of us do yoga all the time, right? Like, no big deal. But for the right person, that simple practice can unlock everything, or that simple instruction. It's really fascinating. And so, together, what we do when you work with me, when you work with a healer or a shaman, I'm assuming we're all awesome. Um, we do practices that help bring out both of that expansion and the shadow work. Like we'll look at what the goals are. We'll look at where the growth needs to take place. We'll collaborate with the universe, with your body, with your soul self, and then get you in touch with yourself and with God. Mm. So ultimately, my goal is to make you whole, which means being in touch with yourself, which also means being in touch with God, and to know yourself in like a know thyself kind of way, know God kind of way. And I think one distinction I want to make with this is not in the seeker kind of way. I think a lot of times in the spiritual world, there's a lot of seekers, like people who just want all the information. They want all the knowledge. They want to have all the teachers. They want to take all the psychedelics and they want to know how the universe works. That's a way of bypassing. We're not actually contributing to anything by doing that. I think occasionally there's people who might be like wisdom keepers. Um, but they're typically a more grounded version of what I'm talking about. So, when I work with someone as a healer, my goal is to bring them to a place of wholeness and to discuss all of these facets of healing to get the most out of the healing experience. I do not believe in long-term practitioner work. I think when people are seeing a practitioner on a weekly basis or they're seeing the same person for months at a time, I think that's a sign of being stuck. I know that's a controversial opinion, but I don't believe that practitioners need to work that way. And it's a huge thing I come up against in the spiritual field because we're not as mainstream as other practitioners out there, and so money is definitely a thing. And I see a lot of spiritual practitioners who insist on seeing people on a weekly basis or like a bi-weekly basis. And honestly, I think that's too much. I think that you're you're not working with them to the fullest if that's the trajectory of your time together. So when I work with a client as a healer, often there's a big consultation. We're going to do a big thing together. We're going to do a big reading. There's a lot of homework because personal responsibility is a thing. And sometimes, that means that we work together regularly for a month or two while you identify some of your barriers or you identify some of your limiting beliefs or resistance. But ultimately, the goal is to set you on a path to find yourself, not with constant support from a singular person. The healers and practitioners we work with really do need to be rotated out and revisited, of course, occasionally. Like, if I have a therapist, I'm going to see him every week for 3 months, and then I'm going to take a break. And then maybe the next time I need a therapist, I'm going to work with a different kind because every layer requires a different kind of medicine, a different kind of person, a different kind of perspective. And maybe I'll revisit that therapist in 2 years when I know that that's what I need again. So I think that's another important piece to the wholeness is that you can't work with one practitioner and get all the pieces you need. You just can't. Like, it doesn't work that way. I don't have all your pieces. I can't tell you anyone who can. I have my things that I'm specialty at, and so do all the other practitioners that I recommend. And that's, just something to keep in mind while you're working with a healer or working with a shaman, just a different perspective on the whole thing. So, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.